Hey ghouls and gals, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's vlog is going to be part 2 of the Winterween Readathon. This vlog is going to cover days 5 through 7. Today is the very start of day 5. I've already completed a lot of the challenges. I've completed 2 books as well, so 3 challenges and 2 more remaining. I'm feeling very confident that I'll be able to finish them all come the end of this Winterween Readathon. But just a little recap of the books that I've already read. I read for the novella prompt, and then also for the book that was published 5 or more years ago, I read You Should Have Left by Daniel Kehlmann, a novel translated by Ross Benjamin. So this was very short, not so sweet, about a writer and his family. They go to the middle of nowhere in the mountains and he needs to work on a screenplay, and mysterious things start happening in the house. And then for the just read a horror or a thriller prompt, I read So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. I really enjoyed this one as well. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's not my favorite Rachel Harrison, but it was vampires. It was a fun time. It had Thelma and Louise vibes, and overall, very enjoyable. Can't complain. I know this one has been getting very mixed reviews, but I would say if you're a vampire fan, you might as well go ahead and check it out. I thought it was a whole lot of fun. And then I have 2 books that I'm actually in the middle of. So I am reading Ghost Camera by Darcy. This is a short story collection. I've been trying to read a couple of the short stories every single day in this readathon, going well so far. And then I also, for the prompt, read a book at night or in the dark. I've been reading Memorials by Richard Chizmar, and this is such a spooky slow burn of a story about a group of students who are traveling throughout the Appalachian Mountains, and they are investigating. They're making a documentary about roadside memorials, and some creepy things start happening. It starts to feel like the memorials are all sort of connected in strange ways. So this has been a great pick for the book that I'm reading at night. I just feel like reading it at night, not in the day, really adds to the creep factor of this one. So those are the 2 books that I'm in the middle of. I also still have a lot of books on the TBR. Like I said, there are 3 more days left. This is the very start to day 5. So I'm feeling really confident that I can get a lot of great reads in. I've been really enjoying my time so far. I haven't read anything that I've not liked during this readathon. I would, however, like to find a new favorite in this second half. Maybe not new favorite of like the year, but potentially like a favorite book of the month. So I am looking forward to these next few days. So game plan for day 5, I'm going to read 2 more short stories in this short story collection, Ghost Camera, and then I'm going to pick up an ebook, and the ebook is the one that I have for the challenge, read a book with a house on the cover or in the title, and I found one that did both. So after I finish the 2 short stories, I'll be picking up 12 Nights at Rotterdam by J.W. Ocker. This one has house in the title, and then the cover, at least the one that I've checked out on Libby, also has a house on the cover. So I am intrigued. I don't know anything about this one other than the fact that it is a haunted house story. I don't even really know how long it is, so I don't really know like how much I'll get through it today. But then at the very end of the day, when it gets to be dark outside, I'll dive into Memorials. I'm really hoping to finish that one today because it's getting really good. I'm at the end, the climax is almost here, so I really want to make sure to finish that one tonight. So that's my ambitious reading plans, but I'm gonna go get to reading. I'll check back in later with another reading update. So it is the tail end of Winterween, day 5. I did finish my 2 short stories that I was planning on reading in Ghost Camera, and if you watched my last vlog, I talked about how this short story collection and really Darcy Coates' work as a whole feels very cozy horror, very goosebumps for adults. Now, the next 2 short stories that I'm going to be talking about, they did not have that cozy feeling. These were a little bit more gruesome, a little bit more dark than some of the other stories in this collection have been. So the first short story of the 2 that I read today was called Remains, and this was another one that was just about 5 pages, but it was very, very gruesome, very dark. It is about an elderly couple, an old man who dies, and how his wife reacts to that. And you think going into it, you kind of know, like, you know the emotional beats and the character beats, and then by the end, it's completely twisted on its head. And it was okay. You know, it was another 5-pager, so it's really hard for me to give a lot of description about it, right, without spoiling it. But that one was very dark. And then the next story, Untamed Things, was about a plane crash. This one is survival horror. We're following someone who survives a plane crash and what she has to do to survive. Survival horror is not typically my favorite, but there are paranormal elements in that one that elevated the reading experience for me. This is another one, not cozy at all. I honestly did think that this one, you could tell where it was going. There was a twist that I didn't feel like was a twist if you're just familiar with a lot of horror tropes, but I had fun. Definitely no standouts in the collection. Those 2 were not my favorite by any means, but I only have 2 more short stories in this collection, so definitely looking forward to maybe finishing it out tomorrow. And then I did have to go to the library today and return a lot of books, and I did notice someone was on hold for memorials, and I do live a little bit away from my library. It is a drive, so I figured I would just go ahead and return it with the rest of my books, but I did have the audiobook checked out from Libby. So the last 4 hours or so of memorials I read via audiobook. I thought it was a well done production. I was kind of hoping that there might be a little bit more with like sound effects. Like, I think this reading experience, and again, I did not listen to this all on audiobook, so you know, I'm only talking about the last 4 hours, but I think it would have been cool if this audiobook would have gotten the horror movie by Paul Tremblay treatment, where we have a dramatized kind of reading, especially of the found footage elements, and maybe more than just one narrator. There were 2 narrators. There was one narrator narrating the segments of memorials that was in first person, and then another narrator for the video footage, but I did wish that it would be a little bit more dramatized. That's okay. I still had a good time with this one. The ending kind of got fumbled a little bit, in my opinion. I was really, really loving this one. More thoughts about this one. I've talked about this book so much, especially in my last vlog, but I loved the slow burn of this one. I loved the slowly creeping Sinister vibes as we follow our 3 main characters, and they're road tripping across very isolated terrain, the Appalachian Mountains, and they feel very unwelcome from day 1, but creepy things start ramping up as they are investigating and doing a report for school. They're making a documentary about roadside memorials, and I really, really loved this one up until the very end. I didn't love the end. The things that happened in the end, I didn't necessarily mind, but I just thought the ending, for how slow-paced this book was, felt a little rushed. And then at the very end, when you think the story is done, there's an after section, not an afterward section. The section is just called After, and it's our main character discussing what happened after the events of the climax to all of the different characters. And this needed condensed, it needed shortened. It was 45 minutes in the audiobook, and it was basically wrapping up every single loose end in a way that I didn't feel like it was necessary. I actually preferred when there was a little bit of mystery to things, and you kind of figured some of it out yourself as you were reading the book. So the reveals, they had already happened. We didn't need to go back in time and then explain exactly how everything came to be and put in every single puzzle. puzzle piece. I just thought like that you could have done it yourself as a reader. And I also do, especially for this story where it has so much to do with cults and just an air of unsolved like mystery, kind of X-Files, almost like it has a lot of fun mystery to it. And just taking a good chunk out of the book, you've already lost the momentum from the ending of the book, the ending of the events, and just explaining and going over every single thing so that there's no more mystery to be had at the end of it. I didn't love that choice because, you know, as I just mentioned, the X-Files, sometimes in those episodes, especially like the Monster of the Week episodes, you did wrap up the mystery. You figured out what was happening, but there's a little teaser maybe at the end of the episode where not everything is explained. Some things are still unexplained and left not tied up at the end of the episode. So this one I just felt like would have been a whole lot stronger for me had it done the same thing and not held the reader's hand and first explained, okay, where are all the main characters now? And I didn't love where some of them were just in terms of trajectory. And then there was a scene at the very end of the afterword that was maybe 10 minutes, or not the afterword. The section's called After. This book does not have traditional chapters. It's divided up into the 7 days that this book takes place in. So day 1 through day 7 are the chapters, and then after, and then the book ends. But there's about 10 minutes at the end of this after section that I thought if it were just that 10 minutes, it would have been fine. So at the end of this great reading experience, I just felt like a lot of the ending could have been cut down, but overall, I had a really great time with this one. So even though I was personally just a little bit let down by the ending, I still loved the journey, and I would highly recommend this to people who love like found footage movies and are looking to replicate that in a book. But I think that's pretty much all I'm going to get up to today. 12 Nights at Rotterdam I do plan on starting. I don't know if I'll start it just like tonight or tomorrow morning. Either way, that is the next book on the list. So that is day 6's plan, starting 12 Nights at Rotterdam, and then also probably finishing up Ghost Camera, and I will talk to y'all tomorrow with another reading update. Hey friends, happy Winterween day 6. I finished Ghost Camera today. I finished the last 2 stories in this collection. The first one was another shorter one, about 8 pages long, and that was Cathedral. And it was, funnily enough, because I just finished up Memorials last night, this was about a couple who are driving down a deserted, like a very isolated stretch of road, and they see a cathedral, they go to check it out. It's very creepy inside there. This one was okay. This had premise potential, but I mean, it was short enough where I didn't mind that I was a little bit let down by it. But I just think our main characters, obviously it's 8 pages. You don't get a lot of character development, but there are reasons for stopping, there are reasons for going in the cathedral, and then there are reasons for continuing on when things get a little creepy. I didn't understand why they would do that. So it was okay. It was an interesting premise, but that leads us to the very last story in this collection, and it's actually the longest story. It's about 115 pages, and it's called A Box of Tapes, and it is in fact about a box of tapes. We are following this woman named Tess, and she has just moved into a new house with her young daughter who's 4 years old, and she is unpacking one night, as you do. It takes, you know, it takes a couple weeks to get fully unpacked, but she is unpacking and she finds a box of tapes that she knows she did not pack, but she doesn't remember having seen in the house when they moved in, and the tapes are sealed. She opens the seal. There is a letter on top of the tapes that's saying, don't watch these. So of course our main character watches them, and this one feels like a mix of The Ring and Sinister. There are a number of tapes. There are 6 tapes in total, and our main character keeps watching these tapes, and creepy things start happening. The tapes start to kind of bleed over into into her day-to-day life with her daughter. This one was very creepy. I think definitely probably the least cozy and truest, like scariest story in this collection. So overall, I would recommend this one. 9 short stories in total. Some of them were a little bit lacking, some of the shorter ones in particular, but I would say that this collection is worth picking up for Ghost Camera and a box of tapes. I really enjoyed both of those, and I thought, you know, Ghost Camera was very fun, very goosebumpsy, and then we had the A Box of Tapes story, which felt a little more The Ring or Sinister, so it was a little bit creepier. So I did enjoy this short story collection. And moving on to my other reading update, 12 Nights at Rotterhouse. And this is the first thing that I've read by this author, but the name sounded familiar, J.W. Ocker, and I did, when I was inputting that I was currently reading this story on Storygraph, I noticed he's published a lot of nonfiction, horror nonfiction that are on my radar, on my TBR, so that's intriguing. I think this looked to be one of, if not his only fiction. It looks like this author writes primarily nonfiction, so that's intriguing, especially because the premise of this story is we have a travel writer. He writes nonfiction, and his specific lens is writing nonfiction pieces about haunted places, but he wants to spend 12 nights, or rather 13 nights, in the beginning that's what he says, that he wants to spend 13 nights at Rotterhouse, but he is staying at this Rotterhouse. It's very infamous for a lot of spooky, scary things that have happened there. He wants to spend 13 nights there and document the paranormal activity and write this nonfiction book. What I think is interesting is it almost feels a little bit meta. It's leaning a little bit meta just because J.W. Ocker seems to be, if not a travel writer, a nonfiction writer that writes about like paranormal and more horror subjects. So that's intriguing that we have a main character that kind of does what the author does or typically does, and I haven't gotten too far into this one, 10% of the way in. I do think it's funny, I didn't plan this in my TBR, but this is the 3rd book that I've picked up for this readathon where it is divided into nights. So there are different sections of the books, night 1, night 2, night 3. Memorials had this, and then You Should Have Left had this as well. So, you know, I'm cautiously looking forward to this one. I don't have a lot to say about it just yet, but I do love a good old-fashioned haunted house story. So I think the premise of this person who I'm curious to see, I haven't really gotten a sense of our main character yet. His name is Felix. I don't know if he leans toward being a believer or not being a believer. I'm curious about that because I think that'll inform his decisions moving forward in this haunted house. So I am curious to see his journey in this haunted house. Obviously reading that via Libby as an ebook, and it's about 300 pages, so I don't think I'll pick anything else up. I'd love to finish it either tonight or tomorrow morning and then dive into maybe one last book before this readathon ends. But that is all I have for today's update. I'm going to go dive back into my book. I'll check back in tomorrow with another reading update. It is now the final day of Winterween, and I've actually completed now all of the prompts for the reading challenge. I finished 12 Nights at Rotterhouse last night, and unfortunately, even though it felt good finishing this because it completed the last challenge of read a book with a house on the cover or in the title, I really did not like this one. Unfortunately, it's definitely the worst book that I've read so far this year, and I did just finish it for this prompt. I don't know if I would have finished it had it not been for this readathon, but let's discuss. This is a very slow burn up until like the 50% mark. This was going okay, honestly, if not very slow. We're following main character Felix, and he is a travel writer. He is spending 12 nights or 13 nights, but the title is 12 nights, so you know something's going to happen. Our main character is spending a significant significant amount of time at Rotter House, which is a very infamous local haunted house. His goal is to write a nonfiction about his experience there and hopefully maybe capture some paranormal activity. I'm not too sure like what his main objectives were, so that leads into up until the 50% mark. My only critiques were, number one, a lot of the prose in this and a lot of the writing and description really felt like narrative nonfiction, which makes sense because this author has written a lot of nonfiction. So even though I really did not like this one, I'm not like writing this author off. I would like to check out his nonfiction, and I did look, at least on Storygraph, his nonfiction has significantly higher ratings than this fiction book does. So I am still optimistic, but it felt like narrative nonfiction, which is great for nonfiction, not so great for fiction. And then the other issue I had was this was just like halfway meta, and I feel like if it just went all of the way meta, this would have been a better reading experience, because the main character parallels Ocker in some ways, just primarily due to the fact, the biggest fact, that they are both nonfiction writers and they're trying to write about this haunted house. And I thought that would have been cool. The Shards by Brent Easton Ellis, I think, is a good example of what I'm talking about here, because in that book, the main character's name is Brett and it's supposed to be the author, and it's like a narrative. It's a novel, it's not a memoir. It feels like a memoir, and some of the things feel like probably they happened in his life or a version of them, and he's just fictionalizing them for a story. I felt like if this book would have been written in a very meta way, that could have worked a lot better for me. Have our main character be the author and talking about, because he does write nonfiction, how he was writing nonfiction about this house and things went really crazy. I think that could have been a good solution, at least in the first 50%. Those are my thoughts. It was a little boring. I didn't really love our main character, but no big issues with him yet. We also have our main character's best friend is staying in this haunted house as well. When I gave the 10% update, he wasn't there yet, but he shows up pretty immediately after, so that's not a spoiler. It's our main character, his best friend, and they have had a falling out about a year before this novel takes place. And this is kind of like an olive branch that Felix extends to his friend Thomas to have him investigate this house with him. So that really adds, honestly, to the slow pace of this book. It's a lot in the beginning of nothing happening, and these two friends talking about a lot of things and like going back and forth and arguing, especially about whether ghosts exist or not. And that was just a little frustrating, especially with every single time the conversation would get a little heated, Felix would remind us that they have had a falling out and nothing is as it was, and it's still a little awkward and tense, and you know that that conflict is going to be a big part in the story because the author keeps constantly reminding you that it is a big part of the story and the relationship. So even up to the 60 to 65% mark, not a lot is happening, and not a lot is happening other than these two men alone in a haunted house. They're trying to get paranormal activity. They're doing very like tropey things on purpose, and that's another reason why I do wish this would have leaned like full into the meta, because throughout this book Felix would say something like, oh, I invited you along because a book with multiple characters is more engaging to read than just an internal monologue. Or he'll say something like, this is a trope, we should do this trope because in haunted house books people always do this. And the thing is, they would do these things, but there was no spin on the material. There was nothing new added to those tropes, so it just felt like very boring and predictable in those aspects. And then a big thing that I had with the description here, this is very self-referential to other things, which was very frustrating. These are two horror buffs and they play this game, I forget the name of it honestly, but essentially they go back and forth listing horror movies that are about a specific subject, and the last one standing, like the one who can think of the most movies, wins. And like that, a significant amount of of page time is dedicated to just listing movie names back and forth. And sometimes when they were describing a room or a feature in the room or something that had happened, the narration would say, this looked exactly like the thing from this movie, which is fine, I guess, but if you haven't seen all of these horror movies, you're left with not really knowing what these things look like. So I thought it was a little too self-referential, but then, you know, things start happening, things start getting paranormal around the 70% mark, and I began to feel optimistic because I was really looking forward to a haunted house story with ghosts. However, our main character does something that really drives me nuts in paranormal horror. Is I understand skeptics and why they don't believe in ghosts, but this is, I'll give it very like loosely, I don't think it's a spoiler, but when our main character here is confronted with paranormal evidence, like the best paranormal evidence, you've never seen it on a ghost show, you've only seen it in fiction because it's so clearly paranormal, he still does not like react to it. He's still like, I don't know if I believe in the paranormal or not. And then they go into another discussion about whether or not ghosts are real, which the mounting evidence, like scientifically, like I don't understand the scientific method, then continuing to deny phenomenon that is happening to you in a really impressive and like very like, you know, Ghostbusters, like irrefutable, like the ghosts are interacting with you and the environment around you, and you're still saying, I don't know if ghosts are real. That got very annoying. And then the ending, there was a twist, and for this book's entire talk about how haunted house books can be very tropey, and this author, not the author, but the author of Felix, wants to subvert everything when he's writing a haunted house novel. The twist ending of this, very easily guessed from, I figured, you know, maybe this is where it's going to go because the characters have an entire multiple page conversation about this twist ending happening, and so you know it's going to happen. And the way that the twist happened, it was like 90% of the way into the book, the twist happened, I didn't like the way it was executed, and then it ended. So it was a little bit of a mess. And then just one more thing, quickly, one more thing I want to add, it got weirdly sexual, like 80% of the way through. There started being some really weird sexual commentary about things in the house and like our main character that made me view him as like, I understand in retrospect why potentially they were added, but they were details that were just really uncomfortable. One of them was about a doll, a haunted doll, for example, and just the way that the character talked about that, talked about just sex in general in this book was very uncomfortable. And honestly, our main character is white. I'm assuming his best friend is black, and the way that the best friend character is written and part of the twist and things that go into the twist, I don't think were written intentionally problematic, but the tropes that were used in that twist are problematic. So I don't think it was the author's intention to create a twist with some problematic, really troubling elements, but they are stereotypes. And for someone who, at least in the book, is so well versed in horror history and horror tropes, like it just seems like a misstep to use those tropes and not really confront them in a significant way in your novel, because it feels more like endorsement the way that they're written rather than commentary about these tropes. So this just, it was a miss. I would not recommend this one, but it does have a house on the cover. So technically I am done with the Winterween Readathon, but I need a palette cleanser. I need, like, I don't want this to be my last update because that was very negative. That was a very negative book review. And honestly, the more I talk about it, the less enthused I am about reading like more from this author. But the beginning, like the first 50% with like the narrative nonfiction elements where I felt like it kind of read more like a narrative nonfiction than a fiction book, I enjoyed that. I would enjoy that in a nonfiction, but the things that I didn't like about this one do make me very hesitant to pick up nonfiction or anything else from this author for that matter. But moving on, we are picking up something that I am hoping to enjoy a whole lot more, and that would be Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the second book in the Indian Lake trilogy. I read My Heart is a Chainsaw for, I didn't read it for her Summerween. I don't know why I almost said that, but I read it around that time. I read it in July. It was a really perfect summery slasher. This one I tried to read pretty soon after that, and then I realized it took place in the winter. So I wanted to read it during the winter months, and I think now is the perfect time to do it. Last night I did start the audiobook as I was making dinner. Continuing on, I think I'll probably read it mostly physically while maybe listening to the audiobook as well, because the audiobook is full cast, which is exciting because my biggest gripe about My Heart is a Chainsaw is that the audiobook narrator did a great job, but just the voice that she used for Jade is not like, that's not who I pictured Jade to be. Jade is such a real character when you read her story. Like, she feels so real to me, and just the voice that the narrator did not sound like her to me. So I am interested to see what she's going to sound like in this audiobook. I am on page 64, and we're actually following like a lot, we're in the headspace of a lot of different characters other than Jade, aka Jennifer. She's going by Jennifer in this book. It has been 4 years since the events that happened in My Heart is a Chainsaw, and that was a little jarring, not going to lie at first. There's a big time jump, and obviously Jennifer is very, very affected by what happened in the first book, and she's finally returning to her hometown, but she returns to her hometown the very same, I think the very same day, yeah, the same day as convicted Indigenous serial killer Dark Mill South escapes into town to complete his revenge killings. So we're setting up for a sequel, and I say we're setting up for a sequel because obviously this is a sequel book, but Jade, or Jennifer in this book, she is obsessed with slashers. She knows so much about slasher lore and horror movies, so her encyclopedic knowledge of horror movies really did help in the first book. So I'm assuming in the second book, she, and with the help of some returning characters, are going to pull out maybe her knowledge of sequel movies and hopefully help save the day. So this is a chunkier one. I think it's around 400-ish pages, I think 450 pages, so I probably will not finish it today, but I should get a good chunk into this one. Actually, today I am doing something a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'm going to go see a movie by myself. I have an AMC A-list pass. I can go see 3 movies a week, and my partner is currently sick, so they are actually showing at my theater. They're showing like an anniversary screening of Seven, which is a movie I have seen such a long time ago, and honestly, thinking about the time, I probably wasn't actually watching it. I was probably like sneaking sections of it as my parents were watching it, but I have not seen it in such a long time. I know like what it's about, but I don't really remember a lot of it, so I'm gonna go see that. I'm gonna go see a little matinee by myself today, so that's gonna cut into the reading time. And then also, this is just such a large book, but I do want to start this one and hopefully end out this vlog with some more positive book thoughts. But that's the plan for today. Gonna go see Seven and then come home and get some reading in. I will check back in tomorrow morning. Obviously, this is the last day of the readathon. I will stop reading at midnight, but then I'll check back in tomorrow with the final reading update of Winterween. Hey friends, it is time to wrap up the Winterween vlog, and I am in a much better mood than I was yesterday. Thankfully, I mean, I wasn't in a bad mood yesterday, but just in terms of reading updates and not really liking the book that I had just finished, I did manage to turn things around. I did end up, before I went to the movie, I went to Barnes & Noble and I picked up a very anticipated book release, and that would be Grady Hendrix's Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. I am so excited to dive into this one. I think I'll try and fit it on my February TBR if I can hold off until then, because I have been waiting for this one for such a long time. I am so excited to read this one, and I am constantly on the hunt for more witchy horror, so definitely very excited to have been able to pick this up yesterday. And then I did go to the movies by myself. It was a fun experience. It was just me and this elderly couple in the theater, so definitely felt like a very intimate viewing experience, and I think I liked that. That was great because it was my very first time going by myself to the movies. I know that everyone at the movies is watching the movie, not the other people. I just have felt weird going to the movies by myself, but I think it's something I am going to implement a little bit more often because I did like it. I had a good time. I enjoyed 7, and I remembered a lot more of it than I thought I did. It's about 2 detectives, and they are hunting down a serial killer who is using the 7 deadly sins to kill his victims, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for the most part. There are some qualms that I just have with the way that the 7 deadly sins are represented, in particular gluttony. It doesn't just mean eating food, but I understand why it was done that way for the movie, just as a vehicle for murder and all of that. But just some issues with, I mean, this came out in 1995, so it is exactly as old as me. So I think it was very gritty and pessimistic about human nature in a lot of ways, and I didn't agree with some of the moralization of certain actions happening. But I thought it was a pretty good movie overall, and having just seen Longlegs, I think last month or the month before, 7 walked so that Longlegs could run, just seeing it as a spiritual kind of predecessor to that movie. So I enjoyed it for what it was, and I enjoyed going to the movies by myself. And yeah, moving on to the very last reading update of this vlog. I was correct, I did not finish this book, but I am now about 200 pages into this one, and I think I'm enjoying it so far. I definitely love the audiobook experience. I've actually, yesterday when I got home from the movie, I was listening to the audiobook while reading it physically. I really enjoyed that, and I really love Stephen Graham Jones's writing style. At this point, I've read so much of his work that it's very comforting to me, especially because the last book that I read tried to be meta in a way that didn't work and didn't do anything different with the material. And this book is dedicated to Wes Craven, and it's very much for people who like Scream, like slashers. This series, very meta, but in a way that really works because it takes tropes and does something with them. And the nods to different slasher films and just tropes and things that happen in a slasher, it just feels fresh and new and fun and like an homage and not fan service in this book. So Stephen Graham Jones does meta horror right. If you're looking for an author that tends to do that, I'd say a lot of his books, a lot of his more recent books, especially this series, I Was a Teenage Slasher, there's another one, The Last Final Girl, I believe. All of those feel very much like meta slashers and commentary, and they add something new to the genre while still playing around with some fan favorite tropes. So I am enjoying this one so far. It picks up a lot faster than the first one, and I'm a little hesitant. I was a little hesitant about the time jump at first, but I've settled into where these characters are now, and I'm hopefully going to really enjoy the kind of second half of this one as well. So that is it for this Winterween readathon. Overall, I had a really good time. I would probably recommend most of what I read, actually, except for 12 Nights at Rotterhouse. That was the least favorite book that I read throughout this readathon. And then I did really enjoy You Should Not Have Left. I thought was a perfect readathon book because it's very short, very compact. It's effective horror in about 100 pages or so, which is perfect for a readathon. I really enjoyed So Thirsty. I had a lot of fun with that. It was a very fast-paced Thelma and Louise vampire story that was also, very short, very readable, which I think are great for readathons. Ghost Camera was a lot of fun. I would recommend it, especially for Ghost Camera and then A Box of tapes, those stories, the first and the last stories, made this short story collection really worthwhile to me. And then I did really love Memorials by Richard Chizmar. I know in this vlog I sounded a little more negative towards it because I still don't love the ending and what was done with the ending, but overall this one is such a blast. And if you like found footage movies, or if you like just 80s horror, I think you should pick this one up. It was a lot of fun. It is very lengthy, so I don't know if I necessarily would recommend it for a readathon, and I would recommend you read that one in the summer, but I did enjoy it. So overall, had a pretty good reading week, and I had a lot of fun with the Winterween readathon. Cannot wait for Summerween. But that is it for this vlog. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel, stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!